Perhaps you could give us a sort of snapshot view of your reasons for being an atheist, and then we can look at those arguments in more detail.
Well, my reasons for being an atheist are simple enough. I just simply don't see any compelling evidence to believe in deities of any kind, male or female or androgynous, of any culture, any race, any philosophy. I don't see that we should have to invent gods for things that we don't understand and can't presently explain. Since the concept of gods first arose, and that must have been many tens of thousands of years ago with our species, many things have become explained. We don't have a rain god any longer, at least we in this civilization as we know it don't have a rain god, because we understand quite thoroughly what causes rain. But we still have a God who promises us immortality and rewards and paradise and whatnot, things that I find untenable. I find them unacceptable. They are not necessary for my philosophy to explain the world as much as I possibly can. That doesn't mean that there aren't mysteries that sort of beleaguer all of us. We'd all like to have answers to mysteries, but to invent deities in order to explain them, I think, is juvenile.
Okay, so you say there's just no evidence. That's sort of foundation of your atheism. Certainly, a lot of people would say, but wait a moment, isn't there just evidence all around us? I mean, the fairly common argument is sometimes called the argument from design, that the world is very complex. It's sufficiently complex that we couldn't explain it were it not for the presence of a deity. I take it that doesn't convince you. Could you try to say why not?
It appears when we look at the world as if it has to have been designed by some sort of intelligence, but that isn't necessarily so. We are relying on our experience, our limited experience of the immediate world in a small time segment that we occupy during our lives in order to make that judgment. It is inescapable that given enough time and enough combinations and permutations of molecules and atoms in order to make molecules, that certain basic forms of life are going to develop, and that those forms of life are going to refine themselves and in most cases will be more and more sophisticated, while at the same time the vast majority of the new species, the new varieties that come along, die out because they're not viable. It's the ones that lived, the ones that survived that we see today, and they are very complex. We hear often the story about, well, how an organ as very sensitive and complex and sophisticated as the eye ever developed by accident. It didn't develop by accident. It developed by a process called evolution, which is a series of experiments that nature plays by repetition, with billions and billions of experiments happening every second for many billions of years. It has to refine itself if there's anything to this survivability of this particular species. And of course, if there isn't, the species vanishes. All we have is the successes of billions and billions of experiments down through the years. That's all we have to show for it.
You've provided a reason, a sort of synopsis of the view of why the design argument doesn't work, and you've tried to say that the basic reason why you're an atheist is that you just don't see any evidence. Would that mean, or is it fair to say that means that you think that people who are theists are stupid or uninformed? How would you describe it? How would you explain the fact that so many people do seem to be theists?
I think the reason that people believe these things, by and large, is that they don't really understand how the real world works. The real world is a mechanistic world. It's electrical, it's electromagnetic in nature, it's physical in nature. It actually works. It's a large machinery, a very complex machinery made that way by the evolutionary process, and that includes the organisms that are here and the geology of the planet that we live on. I think that most people have very, very little knowledge about that sort of thing, and when they start to investigate it, they're absolutely dumbfounded. They're confused and confounded. They're overrun by the problem. If they understood a little better some of the mechanics of how the real world works, they would understand the process much better.
Okay, so part of it is simply that
they're uninformed.
They're uninformed. In fact, you talked about there being mysteries in the world, things that we can't explain, and you acknowledge that there are such things.
Well, not that we can't explain, not that we can't explain at this moment.
And perhaps then part of your point is that even some of the explanations that are there now are not explanations that many of the people in the street would know or understand.
And they also may be explanations that are not quite correct. You look at Newton compared to Einstein. Now, Newton came up with S equals ut plus half at squared, the simple law of motion of bodies, falling bodies and whatnot, and that covers the world very nicely, as Newton knew it. But he didn't know about subatomic particles, which don't obey those laws at all, or about things as large as galaxies and quasars and black holes. They don't obey those laws either. But then when we get into relativity, which is Einstein, and quantum physics, which is a large group of people beyond Einstein, we begin to understand how these things are explained. And S equals ut plus half at squared is not wrong. It's simply buried in all the more complex theories and equations that express really how the world works. Newton wasn't wrong. He just covered a more limited aspect of the universe, a smaller part of the spectrum. So science corrects itself as it goes along. That's something that things like religion don't do. They never correct themselves. They make up dogmas. Those dogmas are established. They're axioms. They don't go anywhere beyond that. They just simply say, this is true and always will be true, and I don't want to hear any discussion about it. I think that's very close-minded, and I think that that science really has the attitude that we should be going after, which is, show me. I want to know more.
We've talked some about the arguments for the existence of God, why people think they might have evidence. The other way in which people often go when they describe why they are theists is they will say or talk about faith. How would you understand claims about faith?
Define your term for me.
Well, I don't know. I guess the basic idea is that the average person who uses the language will say there are mysteries in the world, there are things we can't explain, that we have to have some kind of faith either to provide that explanation, to provide meaning in life, to provide morality, whatever it might happen to be.
Well, people say that I have no faith. I have more faith than the average person, I think, but it's not the kind of faith that they have. There are only two varieties of faith, so far as I see it, blind faith and reasoned faith. I have reasoned faith in the probability, the very strong probability, that the sun will rise again tomorrow, as it always has. That is, that the earth will rotate in the direction of the sun, and the sun will appear to rise off the horizon. I know that from past experience, and I know that it's been going on for many millions of years, and I expect that it will go on for many millions more. I do that based on reason and expectation and past experience. But blind faith is, oh, I'm going to live forever. I just know it. When I die, I won't really die. I'll go someplace else. There. I don't want to think anything more about that. I've just decided that's the way it is. I've decided that's what I'm going to accept. That's blind faith, because there is no evidence for that whatsoever. The kind of faith that I have is faith based upon evidence. I have faith in my friends. I have faith in the chair that I'm sitting on. I've been sitting on this for many years now. It hasn't collapsed yet. When it does collapse, my faith will be broken in this chair, and I'll either get a new one or I'll fix it. But faith is a very useful part of our lives, of course, if it's based upon experience and upon evidence.
Other people, when they talk about their beliefs, will say they've had certain experiences, that they've seen God work, that prayer has been answered. As a former magician, I mean, how do you evaluate these sorts of claims? What do you have to say about them?
Let's handle their prayers have been answered. What percentage of their prayers have been answered? That's always the question that I ask, and they say, oh, always. I never have any failure that way. What do you pray for? Do you pray that you'll have enough food to put on the table tomorrow? And you do have it, but that's largely due to your own efforts, is it not? Yes, but it's possible that I might not have found the food or might not have had the money to buy the food. That's all possible, too. These people are very selective in their thinking. I hear people say all the time, I've made prayers, and I've never had one of my prayers refused. But I find that very difficult to believe, because if I then ask them to pray for something, they say, oh, no, it has to be something that originates with me. It has to be something that had a real positive need. But look at the prayers that went up from Dachau and Auschwitz. Look at the millions of people who prayed that they would not die, and they did die viciously, cruelly, savagely. And they prayed not to die. Where was God at that time? We can easily say, oh, but God works in mysterious ways. He had his own reason for doing that. That's a rationalization that, I'm sorry, I find very difficult to accept.
All right, what I'd like to do is now turn back and talk a little bit about this idea of the importance of critical thinking skills. When you say critical thinking skills, what exactly does that imply, and how does a person inculcate those?
Instead of accepting things that are published in the media or because they appeared on Oprah or because someone wrote a bestseller book about it, look into these things. Investigate them. Start from the bottom. Go to the library and look up the opposite point of view, perhaps, and put them side by side.
Okay, 20-second summary on why you're an atheist.
I just don't find sufficient evidence out there that would make me create or maintain the belief in a deity of any sort.
All right, thank you very much for appearing on the show today.